The official story is that the old textile mill has been abandoned for 50 years, but the locals in Hollow Creek know better. They speak of it in hushed tones, a place where shadows linger long after sunset. They call it the Whispering Factory. We went there to find out why. The descent began into the factory's gut. Each step down the rusted iron staircase felt like a step into another time, a forgotten world coated in decay. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and rust, a metallic tang that coated the back of the throat. Down in the boiler room, the humidity was suffocating. It clung to everything, beading on the walls like sweat. Paint, blistered and peeling, revealed layers of forgotten colors, a history of slow surrender to the damp. You could see your own breath hang in the air, a fleeting ghost in the oppressive stillness. It felt alive, as if the building itself was breathing, its slow, wet exhalations turning the air to mist. Every surface was slick to the touch, a cold, clammy film that seemed to seep right through your clothes, chilling you to the bone despite the stifling air. At the far end of the room stood a single metal door. It was different from the others, heavier, more industrial, and slightly ajar. It wasn't an invitation, but a dare. A sliver of absolute blackness sliced through the dim light, a void that seemed to absorb the flashlight's beam rather than reflect it. There was no sound from beyond it, a silence so profound it felt louder than any noise. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a scream, a heavy, waiting stillness that promised something was on the other side. There was a moment of hesitation, a shared, unspoken question hanging in the air between us. But we had come too far to turn back. A gloved hand reached out, pressing against the cold, unforgiving steel. The door resisted, its hinges seized by decades of rust and neglect. Then, with a final, determined push, it gave way. The sound it made was excruciating, a high, metallic shriek that echoed through the chamber, a tortured scream of metal on metal that grated on the nerves and set our teeth on edge. It was the sound of a tomb being opened. The room beyond was small, claustrophobic. A single bare bulb hung from a frayed wire, its light weak and unreliable. It flickered erratically, casting the room in a frantic, stuttering strobe that made the shadows dance and writhe like living things. Dust motes, thick as insects, swarmed in the unstable beam of light, disturbed for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The air was stale, motionless, thick with the scent of old paper and something else. Something faintly sweet and unsettling, like dried flowers left on a grave. And then we saw them. The walls. Every square inch, from the damp floor to the water-stained ceiling, was covered in photographs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Sepia-toned portraits, black and white candids, faded Polaroids. A vast, silent congregation of faces from a bygone era. They were workers, families, children. A visual census of the town's past, all collected here in this hidden, forgotten room. It wasn't a memorial. It felt like a shrine, or a prison. Each face stared out from the wall, their expressions captured and held captive by the silver nitrate. As we moved closer, a horrifying detail emerged. The eyes. In every single portrait, the eyes had been violently scratched out, gouged away with a sharp object, leaving behind ragged, gaping holes in the paper. It was a meticulous, obsessive act of violence, an attempt to blind this silent audience, to erase their gaze. The edges of the photos were curled and brittle, stained by time and moisture, but the defacement was deliberate. It transformed the gallery of faces into a gallery of the faceless, an army of blinded witnesses. The sheer wrongness of it was a physical blow. Mira's breath hitched, her breathing turning shallow and rapid. The beam from her flashlight, once steady, now trembled, its small circle of light skittering across the mutilated faces on the wall. The cold of the room had found its way inside her, a deep, internal chill that had nothing to do with the temperature.
It's watching us.
Then the whispering grew, not one voice, but many.
Layers of murmurs tangled together, echoing from every direction. Words emerged, faint but clear. Join us. Join us.
Panic erupted. The whispers were inside our heads, coming from the walls, from the floor. Raffi spun around, his camera a wild, disoriented eye trying to capture a source that wasn't there. The room became a vortex of sound and motion, the flickering light smearing the walls of blinded faces into a terrifying blur. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the voices, a chorus of spectral invitations that promised a terrible belonging. It was the factory. The factory was speaking, and the shadows. They stopped obeying the laws of light. The single flickering bulb was the only source, yet shadows now moved on their own accord. They detached from us, rippling across the walls like black water, coalescing in the corners, stretching and shrinking with a life of their own. They were no longer mere absences of light, but presences, dark, fluid shapes that moved with a chilling, deliberate purpose against the frantic strobing of the bulb. We fled. Bursting through the heavy doors, we stumbled out into the freezing night air of the loading yard, gasping, chests burning. The sudden shock of the cold was a slap in the face, a brutal return to reality. Or so we thought. We scrambled away from the building, putting distance between ourselves and the whispering room, the cacophony of voices still ringing in our ears. The silence of the yard felt fragile, temporary, like a held breath before a final, terrible exhalation. But we hadn't escaped. We had only traded one prison for another. A thick, unnatural fog had descended upon the yard, swallowing everything in a blanket of opaque white. It was impossibly dense, clinging to the ground and curling around the rusted railings and our own legs like grasping, spectral fingers. The world had shrunk to a few feet in every direction. The factory, the street, the sky, all of it was gone, erased by the suffocating mist.
Where's Raffi?
The question hung in the thick, dead air. We were a group of 4. Now we were 3. The yard was utterly silent. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound and terrifying emptiness. The only movement was a tattered windsock, fluttering weakly in a breeze we couldn't feel. From above, the fog that filled the yard wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It seemed to breathe. It pulsed, subtly, rhythmically, like a vast sleeping organism. It swelled and then receded, a slow, monstrous respiration that was tied to the very factory it shrouded. We hadn't just run into fog. We had run into the belly of the beast. We were inside it now, and it was all around us.
He was right behind me.
Arca's voice trailed off as his eyes fixed on the factory facade, which loomed like a ghost ship in the fog. High above, on the second story, a window pane was shattered, and framed within the jagged opening, a figure stood perfectly still. A silhouette against the deeper darkness of the building's interior. It was motionless, a stark, human-shaped cutout in the gloom. It was Raffi. He hadn't made it out, or he had been pulled back in.
He's waving.
No, he's signaling.
The silhouette's arm moved, a slow, deliberate gesture. But it wasn't a wave for help. It was a beckoning motion, an invitation. From inside the broken window, a pale face drifted forward out of the shadows, pressing close to the glass. It was Raffi, but not Raffi. His expression was placid, his eyes vacant. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Join us.
The whisper came again, and from behind them this time.
We didn't need another warning. We ran blindly, desperately, away from the yard, away from the factory, away from the voice of our lost friend. We burst out of the fog and onto the empty, rain-slicked street, our feet splashing through puddles under the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. We didn't stop running until the sky began to pale, the deep blue of night giving way to the bruised purple of dawn. The unnatural fog thinned, dissolving as the first rays of sun touched the horizon. The streetlights clicked off one by one. The world started to wake up, the sound of distant birdsong a fragile counterpoint to the ringing in our ears. The nightmare was over, but the night had taken something from us. The next morning, we sat in the sterile silence of the school library. 3 survivors. We hadn't slept. The fluorescent lights were harsh, unforgiving, exposing the exhaustion etched onto our faces. Between us, on the polished wood of the table, sat Rafi's camera. We had found it lying in the street where he must have dropped it. Its lens was cracked, a spiderweb of fractures distorting the world it saw. It felt like a relic from a war zone.
We said we'd solve the mystery.
I think we became part of it.
There was only one thing left to do. See what the camera saw. Mira's thumb hovered over the small play button, a moment of profound dread and morbid curiosity. With a final, shaky breath, she pressed it. The tiny plastic click echoed in the silent library, a sound as final as a closing lock. The small LCD screen flickered to life, not with an image, but with a blizzard of digital snow. A loud, rushing hiss filled the air, the sound of empty airwaves, the sound of nothing. It was the sound of the fog, the sound of being erased. Then an image resolved through the static. Rafi's face. It was impossibly close to the lens, distorted by the proximity, his features filling the entire cracked screen. And he was smiling. It was a wide, placid, uncanny smile that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were empty, looking at something far away. He looked serene. He looked lost. He looked like one of them. The footage was from after he was taken. He had turned the camera on himself. "Join us!" The screen cut to black. The whisper, captured on the camera's microphone, hung in the air for a moment before fading into a low electronic hum, which then died completely, leaving us in absolute stunned silence. Life in Hollow Creek goes on. The sun shines, people walk their dogs, the world turns as it always has. To an outsider, it's just another quiet, peaceful town. They don't see the cracks in the facade. They don't hear the faint whispers carried on the wind from the edge of town. They don't know that some places are hungry, and that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. But the factory remembers. Deep within its decaying corridors, where the light struggles to reach, there is new evidence of its unending work. Fresh scratch marks mar the brick walls, raw and angry. They weren't there before. Dust, disturbed by the carving, still falls like a fine, chalky snow settling on the floor. The factory is always adding to its collection, always cataloging its acquisitions. A single final line is etched into the wall, a name, added to a long, long list of others who were drawn in by the whispers, who came to solve the mystery and became part of it instead. Rafi. The corridor is empty now. The only sounds are the low hum of a dying light bulb and the faint draft that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. It is quiet. It is still. It is waiting. Because it knows that curiosity is a powerful thing. And sooner or later, someone else will come looking. Someone else will hear the whispers